Okay, so we have our pattern pieces that have been cut out, as you saw in the last part 1. This is now part 2. We have all of these lines on our pattern pieces that we need to mark out. Now these are our boning channels. In other words, the channels we're going to stitch between the two layers of corset that allow our boning to slide through and create a bit of structure to this corset. And so we now need to mark these onto our pattern pieces here, okay, onto our cotillion. The best way to do it is to basically put your paper pattern back over your two pieces of material and just pin it back again. Okay, that's fine. And then we use something called a tracing wheel. Now this is not a particularly good one because it's too fine. If you can get one that's a little bit thicker, like the individual spokes are quite thick, then it will mark a little bit better. And the way we use this is basically we're just going to draw our lines using this, and this will basically puncture the material below and it will mark with a fine line on the other side, and then we can draw it in with pencil or chalk or whatever you want to use. Okay, so we're literally just going to start drawing all of these lines. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you very much, Jackie. Jackie is our resident intern who's helping me out at the moment. It's absolutely fantastic. And yeah, so basically you want to press quite hard just so that it actually goes through. And if you do very small little gradual kind of, as you can see here, she's rolling it backwards and forwards, that allows you to stay on a straight line, because, and it also stops the material underneath puckering up. Because when you put in lots of tiny little holes, for some reason it sticks to the pattern piece and it can move and your lines can be slightly off. So just, yeah, do that action and it's going to work beautifully. So on the other side, if you can see, I don't know if you can see in this light, it's very difficult, probably not, but you're going to have these very, very faint lines that are going to appear, and then with your pattern master later, we're going to basically draw these on with chalk or with pencil. We're going to use pencil because this is a toile, but anyway, so we have to do this to all of our pattern pieces. So Jackie's going to carry on with that and I'm going to help her in a minute. And you do exactly the same for all of your pattern pieces. Now remember, you only do this for pattern 1. Do not do this for pattern 2 because there's no point, you don't need it. You only need it on one side of your corset, the underside. Okay? And once again, you'll understand all about the underside and the exterior surface later. But for now, just basically translate all of your markings onto pattern 1. Okay? And if you want to, you can always mark these as well, either by using the hole punch we used before in part 1, or with your pattern wheel, you can just do a little cross. Okay, these are just the eyelets that make up the back of the corset. And we'll show you when that's all done. Okay, so now we have our pattern piece. And you see all the little lines. We've basically drawn this out onto our cotillion, and obviously we've drawn in with the pencil lines as well. If you're using chalk, fine, try and make sure you have very, very sharp, fine chalk. If you're using pencil for a toile, make sure you have a retractable pencil because it's got a much sharper point and you want to make sure the lines are very, very sharp. Now, we've been doing this very, very quickly, and what I've kind of realised is when it comes to drawing your lines, because this is an Illustrator or digital pattern, the lines are perfectly spaced apart, and so you want to be very, very careful when you start to use your tracing wheel and put these lines on your pattern. Also, when it comes to drawing them in, you want to make sure that these two, or any of them, are almost exactly, are very, very close to this pattern here. In other words, I'm rambling, I know, but you have to make sure the gaps are almost exactly similar, because these are going to be boning channels. When it comes to later on, and you're feeding your boning into this, if it's too narrow, it's going to get trapped, it's going to get stuck. So here, for example, is a little bit too narrow. So you have to kind of look at your pattern very clearly and make sure that your lines are literally as perfect as possible. And try and use, you know, long, smooth lines, because also these will eventually become your stitching lines. So obviously, if this is in like a pink or a black or a contrast thread, if these lines are wonky, if they go a bit thin, it's not going to look very attractive on the actual corset when it comes to finishing it. So really make sure that these lines are very, very well made, and also the lines are very smooth and sweeping and very, very clean, and they're the right kind of distance apart. So be very careful at this point in time. Also, another thing which I didn't expect to happen, but it's just one of those things that might happen, just so we're very clear on it. This is obviously our pattern pieces, and this is the centre front that will go together. Okay, so when it's all sewn together, it'll look like this, which is great. However, we need our lines to be on the opposite side. So for example, the line should be on this side instead of this side, because we have two of the same. So make sure that when you have your pattern pieces, you want to make sure the lines are on both sides opposite. Does that make sense? It should be visually obvious, if that makes sense. So all your lines, you want to end up with the lines on this side and this side, the opposites, for every single pattern piece. Okay, and you'll understand why we're doing that a little bit later on. Okay, so make sure these things are very apparent. Also, you don't have to bother drawing on the seam allowance because that's just a natural thing we're going to do on the sewing machine anyway. It's just the boning lines. Also, on some of the patterns, you'll see there's a 0.5 cm kind of like boning down the side. Now this is because when two pattern pieces are put together, they will naturally have boning down all the side seams, okay, or down all the seams. So this eventually turns into a 1 centimeter boning channel, okay. Also, you don't need to mark these on your pattern pieces so much because when we come to actually sew it together, it's going to be natural anyway. We're going to use the sewing foot to judge this distance. If you don't understand that, you'll see when we kind of come to it. So the only lines you need to